Well, I almost have to answer it starting backwards because the later years, the 50s and 60s, that's where his audience becomes overwhelmingly white and he gets vilified often in the black press and especially the young, more militant African Americans. They looked at him smiling and singing "Hello, Dolly" and rolling his eyes, and they're like, "Well, that guy, that's Uncle Tom." And so my first book, "What a Wonderful World," that was just about the last 24 years, and I was sitting on all these tapes. My day job at the Armstrong Archives, Lewis made 700 reel-to-reel tapes in the last 20 years, and I could hear him cursing about race and venting, and you could see how smart he was and how hurt he was, especially at the very end of his life when he looked out and he saw that his own people were no longer really with him. And then he kind of lashes out in some private manuscripts, and it's pretty ugly. But that book I wanted to write just so he would have. The ability to defend himself, and so people could see just how shrewd he was and how brave he was, telling off Eisenhower and talking about Selma and putting his career on the line. So that was where I was coming from when I wrote the first book. This era, the big band years, I had read a few biographies on Armstrong where other writers started dropping hints that view of Armstrong started earlier. That in 1929, when he starts recording these pop songs and Guy Lombardo numbers and making these movies, that's when the black audience first said, "Well, we're done with this guy." And so that was the stigma that was kind of anything I was bumping up against was there, and I couldn't shake it. So when I started researching this book, I said, well, the first thing I got to do is go to the black press. Everything's digitized. Let me go to the Pittsburgh Courier. Let me go to the Chicago Defender, New York Amsterdam News, the Baltimore Afro American. How are they covering Louis Armstrong? And that was probably the biggest eye opener that I had in the entire research and writing of the book. Was in this period particularly, the black press is with him. They are cheering him on like Joe Louis. And anytime he makes a movie or breaks a box office record or appears on the radio or featured in a magazine or mentioned in Walter Winchell's column, I mean, it's like block letter headlines. And that was something I wanted to come across because, as you mentioned, the standard criticisms of Armstrong about how, oh, he went commercial and he's not playing from the heart anymore and all this kind of stuff, that's most of the white jazz critics, starting with Leonard Feather and John Hammond around 1932-33. The black press, they love the big band. It's actually when Armstrong leaves the big band, that's when they have more trouble with the All Stars group because it sounded like quote unquote Dixieland and all that stuff. So there's all these issues at play, but there's also seeds of it. At one point, Armstrong makes Pennies from Heaven. There's a debate in the black press about whether or not this role is actually progress or not. And so I quote heavily from that. So there's the seeds of some people who are going to have some problems with Armstrong's personality. But for the most part, I mean, especially the theater, the Apollo Theater, the audiences, African Americans were with him 100% of the way. And so I wanted to really lean on that and say, okay, Armstrong did have his issues later on. He was hurt by it. Let's not forget him standing up for himself. Let's also not forget that in this period, he's the first African American to, have featured billing in a Hollywood film, first African American to host a nationally sponsored radio show, first African American to do its own announcing in New Orleans, first interracial recording duet with Hoagie Carmichael, one of the first integrated records with Jack Teagarden, first African American jazz musician to published an autobiography in 1936. He's starring on Broadway. He's touring the South. He's going to England. And the hell he has to deal with getting arrested, getting molested, all the stuff that he has to go through just being black in this time period. And to emerge from that, it's deep. It's really deep.